Welcome to How Things Connect, where we share insight and wisdom on healing, empowerment, and regeneration. I'm so pleased today to have as my guest, Brynja Magnusson. Brynja is an author, illustrator, and practitioner on topics of energetics, mysticism, and spirituality. Through the I-Ching, animal totems, human design, and other healing modalities, she uses art to expose the lost or obscure tools of self-guidance and orientation that not only help navigate the vicissitudes of life to bring more clarity and consciousness, but also address physical pain and chronic illness. Her focus has been in modalities such as shamanic initiations, Eastern spirituality, manual therapies, nahuatl ritual, and nature immersion. Brynja's work on how to navigate through dark times and how to bring more enlivening awareness is expressed through tools that she shares as beautiful books and card decks, as well as through her readings. Welcome, Brynja. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Thank you very much for having me here, Stephanie. And thank you for that beautiful intro.
Thank you so much for being on the show. So it's a big theme in your work that's all about orienting oneself through chaos and change, which, by the way, is a perfect topic for where we are these days in our world today. And would you say that this is your mission, and what led you there?
I would, even though the mission always changes, it's hard to have just one word or one mission statement that stays with you all throughout life. But the original initiation that I experienced that kind of set me along this path did leave me with this sensation of what I've been privileged enough to experience as maybe an introduction to spirituality was so profound that I should share it if I can. And it's a long story of how I began on this journey, which I think was about maybe 2 years before I met you. And in that experience, I had kind of this spontaneous awakening, and I had never experienced anything like it. And during that experience, which lasted about a month, I had so many kind of like guides or sensations of this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And once that passed, my feeling was, I don't know exactly what just happened to me, but if I can figure out what it is.
Can you share what exactly happened?
Sure.
Sharing this awakening.
So, yeah, well, it was, I think I was about 22, and I woke up one morning and I felt this intense sensation of like a pull, and I'd never experienced anything like this before. And I felt this pull to go find something outside. So I jumped out of bed, I put on my shoes, and I started running out into the woods. And as I started running, I realized I'm going the wrong way. I turned around because the pressure was getting more intense as I was going that way. So I ran the other way. I was just taking off down a street I'd never run down before. And eventually I came towards what was pulling me. And what was pulling me was this snake in the middle of the road, this dead snake. And it was blue and kind of shimmering. And I stood there, and when I saw it, all the pressure had lifted. And so I thought, why was I pulled out of bed in the morning to come find this animal? And the realization of what it was kind of just settled onto me. And it was that I was about to experience a really huge shift, a really huge change. And the change that I already knew was like kind of intrinsically had the feeling of this is what it must be, was that my partnership was about to end very suddenly. And I had been with my partner for 4 years at that point, very happily. But then that night, my partner found somebody else. And it was just a few hours after that experience, and I knew it was coming. And so when he came the next day to let me know what had happened, I was so codependent. I was so worried about what was going to happen that I ran down to the river, and I jumped into the river, tried to meditate. When I got out of the river, as I was walking home to, anticipate this breakup, I closed my eyes and I was watching myself walk. It was like I was out of my body. And I could see in my abdomen this snake, this blue snake that I had just seen coiling and uncoiling. And when I opened my eyes, all of my codependency was gone. All of the fear I had about this like looming big breakup was gone. And this sensation was so profound. It was so like, it was like I didn't even feel like I was walking on the ground. Um, and and I went through this breakup, and it was the most beautiful breakup I could possibly imagine. But it was not only that. I had been ill for a while with stomach problems. It all went away. I was an insomniac. I could sleep. I could fall asleep in 10 seconds, and I was having these like past life flashbacks. And during this time, I was feeling so changed and so full of love, and kind of so full of understanding this kind of macro view of what was going on, that I was writing it down. I was saying, like, I don't know what's going on, but something's happening. And this feeling, this sensation lasted for a full month. And during that time, I had an experience where I had picked up a book about shamanism, and I'd been trying to read it over the summer, and I opened it to the page that I had left off on. And it was like a beautiful, cloudy day in the summer. And I started reading the passage. My teacher was brought to shamanism in the most intense of initiations. He was struck by lightning. And when I read the word lightning, lightning struck outside the house out of nowhere. There was no thunderstorm. And it was such a loud, close encounter with lightning that it's terrifying. It felt like the whole house picked up and slammed back down to the ground. And in that moment, and feeling already so open from this experience that I had been living, it was like it had cemented me into, this is what you're supposed to be doing. And I felt so grateful that I had been finally given the task of my life of go learn what this is, this type of spirituality. But also, how do I do that? I don't know how to begin this process. But it was such a magical experience that even as it faded away, I was able to kind of structure my life around, how can I begin to learn? And from there, I started, chipping away at it and trying to find as many modalities as I could to understand energetics and understand, possibly what could have happened to me in that experience. And it was only, I think, 6 months later that I picked up a book and I read a passage about what a Kundalini experience is, a Kundalini awakening. And the imagery was so identical to what I had experienced. I thought, okay, well, maybe it was this. But from there, I continued to try and seek out systems that would facilitate this type of learning. So I started a shamanic apprenticeship. I was doing vision quests. You and I met on a vision quest. I started learning human design and studying the gene keys. But what really started happening was that after that experience with the snake, so many animals started coming into my life and coming at pivotal moments where I needed guidance. And it was becoming so common and so profound, the messages that were coming, that I couldn't ignore it anymore. I didn't want to believe that I was getting my directives on my life path from interactions with animals, but that was what started happening. And as I was trying to figure out the next steps of how do I move out of this career path in New York City, doing the commute and doing the regular job, how do I shift over to finding the right person to study with and finding the right materials to look into? And all of those directives started coming with interactions with animals, and not quite as profound as the first interaction with the snake, but still feeling that pull to go out into nature. And there was something that I would need to see. And like, for instance, when I decided to finally take the plunge to go into a different career path and just leave behind everything I had done before, I was getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go to work. And I stepped outside and I said, today is the day I have to decide. Today's the deadline. Do I go forward into a completely new career? And I have no idea what to do. And I said, I was like, if you're out there, spirit, can you please send me a message? And I waited. And then this great horned owl came and started hooting. And I hadn't heard a great horned owl in this area almost ever in my entire life. And it came right at the moment that I asked for it. And so these experiences started happening more and more and more, to the point that it became like a very trusted wisdom of, I can actually go out and ask for advice and receive it. And I had grown up with some of the materials about reading animal medicine and animal totems. But from this point, I started tracking it in my own life and tracking it in the lives of people around me that were having these types of animal interactions. And I started to realize that there is a language going on here. There's a dialogue between nature and our conscious mind that's informing us about what's going on around us. It's one way to tap into a matrix of understanding, like the language of the realm that we're living in. And there's probably millions of ways to tap into this language. But for me, this was the one that appeared and started giving me really reliable information. And it was kind of like, the more I started listening, the more it started to show up. And then, so this really started to snowball, that as I was going down this kind of bumpy path, because once you start really getting into the interesting realms of spiritual journeying and self-work, it can be very confusing. It can be very bumpy. It can be dark. It can be challenging. And this ballast that I kept with me at all times was, I can always tap into what's going on in nature. I can go out for a walk in the woods and ask for guidance. And so reliably does it come that the part of my mind that says this isn't real has gone away. And the part of my being that says this is something I can profoundly trust has really stepped up to the plate. And so this kept developing with all of my other studies, that it eventually became something that I wrote about. And I'm still writing about it. I'm still learning, still trying to piece it all together.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing. And that you actually answered the call, which takes a lot of courage, because it's almost, it's happening, but then to trust it is a whole other thing.
Yeah, well, I tried to resist for a little while, but I was sick. And I consider this kind of a blessing and a curse of, sometimes your body calls the shots for you. I was suffering from this kind of mysterious autoimmune-esque stomach condition, and no doctors seemed to be able to figure out what it was, but I was just steadily declining, and I had been for quite a few years. And I was becoming so frightened that I was kind of willing to take whatever step was required. And even after I had this Kundalini experience, where my stomach problems went away, my insomnia went away, and I just, like, my skin was like glowing. I looked completely different. But after that experience ended, I started to become sick again. I went back to my regular life where I was commuting into New York City. And, there's nothing more soul killing, in my opinion, than a Metro North commute. And I started to get sick again. Mm-hmm. And in this way, my body was kind of disallowing me from going down a path that wasn't right for me. And this continues to this day. If I start to go down a path that's not right for me, I get sick again. And at one point in the year after I had this Kundalini event, I was getting so frightened about being sick that I was going into the woods every single day just to find comfort, even if I wasn't, having any huge connection with animals or the just the innate spirit of the forest. But there was one day where I went in and I was really thinking, I really just don't know what to do at this point. I don't know what path to follow. I don't know how to start on this path. I don't know who to find, and I don't know how to get better. And so I was again pulled out into the woods. And what I came across almost as soon as I got into the path was I came across these two snakes, and they were both eating the same frog. They both had their mouths around each end of the frog, which is, for anyone familiar with the tarot, it's kind of reminiscent of the Lover's card of there's two things pulling you and there's indecision. I didn't know this at the time though. So I just sat and watched it for about an hour while these two snakes, slowly both got their mouth more and more around this poor frog, until finally their mouths were completely occluding the frog, covering him. And then one snake finally got the upper hand and the other one let go. And the slightly bigger snake, just slightly bigger, swallowed the frog and they went off. And I thought, oh my gosh, what does this mean? And again, the meaning just kind of settled in, which was that these two snakes are saying, you have two changes you can make. There's two paths you can take. And this frog is representing your healing. And as long as you're trying to have one foot in both paths, you won't be able to swallow that healing. So you better decide. Otherwise, you're going to kill yourself trying to stay into the expectation of what you should do. And the part of you that's just a little bit bigger, the part of you that you know is a little bit bigger, which is the part of me that wanted to pursue this spiritual calling that I had. And then right after that, I was able to take that plunge both feet, but I don't think I would have had the wherewithal or the courage or the understanding that was what was killing me, was being in this indecision space.
Mm-hmm.
So thank God for those snakes. And these stories just like they pile up, and now I have this very thick journal that I keep, where anytime an experience like this happens, I write it in, the day and what happened and how I figured out what it means. And not always do I understand, but very often there's some kind of incredible message behind it.
That's incredible. I mean, I know you mentioned before also that you've had life-altering experiences just being in nature that actually have helped you heal your chronic illness. And I know a lot of people there's so many people who have issues that doctors cannot fix, or that they have kind of gone down different roads and still not able to work out why, and how to come back into sort of physical vitality. Is that the story that you just told, that you just told us about, the one that actually helped heal you, or were there more that you'd be happy to share?
There are more. That was a really big one because it was the start. But there have been other experiences where I've been, in a state of being a little bit traumatized, for lack of a better word, being shocked and feeling like there was no help that I could find, and going out, almost like an emergency treatment protocol of I'm going to go out into the woods, I'm going to fast, I'm going to stay there until I get better. And I'm going to make a big prayer into the woods and say, please help me. I need help. I don't know what's in here. Like, can you send me help? And in that experience, I also had this very pivotal, unexplainable experience of a feeling that something had approached. And well, the real story is, I had gone in, I had felt very disconnected and shaken up from an experience that I had. I went out into the woods, I set up a hammock, and I said, I don't feel any connection to the spirits of nature anymore, nothing. And can you please come help me? I really, really need help. And I got in my hammock, I curled up, and I was just shaking in terror. I felt like I was going to be eaten by a mountain lion. It felt like there was something walking around outside my camp area. And then I felt these hands, almost like a pressure push in on my hammock, and I fell asleep instantly. And I
Wow.
woke up 2 hours later, and all of this dissociation and the feeling shaken up from this experience I had had was gone. And I was able to get out of my hammock and say, like, I'm cured. I've been cured. And I was able to go back to my car and go home and recover. And I've had several experiences like this where I've had initiations, whether just alone in nature or through a more structured traditional initiation, where it feels like something that was holding me back or something that was um, not healthy for me was just plucked away.
Mhm.
And that's only one way that I find that you can find clarity in nature. And I think that's attuned to me, but everybody's different. Everyone has a different way of tapping into this subtle language. Some people use pendulums, some people use tarot cards, some people throw the I-Ching, and some people, they vary. It depends what's going on for you, where you can find um, the clarity. For me personally, I find that the messages that I need to hear emerge out of the patterns of nature. And I think everyone should have some kind of base education of how to read those languages, because it might be that one day, you don't know what to do and you're in a complete state of confusion, and something comes out of the woods and finds you, or you find yourself pulled into the woods or into the mountains, and you find something that you need to see, to have the base to say, I think I know how to interpret this, or just to remember to see it and register that this might be some kind of guidance. But there are so many languages like this that are either forgotten or not so popular, or they're just, we don't get so much of an education of how to navigate through states of confusion. And states of confusion are so natural. In fact, I would say they are necessary. It's kind of like the seasons. It
Mhm.
wouldn't be natural to have a season of summer all year round unless, you live in a climate where it's like that. But there's even still, in warm climates, there's cyclical changes,
Exactly.
dry or wet.
So, right.
Yeah. So to go through a period where, everything seems to withdraw and the fat is cut away, and things are confusing or things are difficult, um, that state, kind of like the way a tree pulls its leaves down in the winter and pulls all of its energy down into its roots, it's actually good for the tree. It helps it live a long life. It helps it grow. And if we consider that these periods we go through where we're confused and we don't know what we're doing, if we consider them as bad, um, we might lose the value of, this is actually a seeding cycle. There are some seeds that cannot germinate unless they are kept frozen for a few months. And it's the same thing with the seasons of our lives. And if you're any kind of creative person, if you're any kind of person that has to produce regularly, there is a season to this. And part of that season is you might go through periods that are very low. They feel very low frequency. They feel very devoid of creativity. They feel like you don't have what you need. They feel confusing or like a nightmare. And in those periods, you can take advantage of it. You can view it as, thank goodness I'm going through this period, because it's going to open up the next period of my life that I need. The seed will not take hold unless I make fertile ground for it right now. And because these periods of confusion were, so regular in my life, and I think it's regular in everyone's lives. I think I just got a big dose of going back and forth between confusion and orientation and disorientation and orientation, that I started to realize you can become very masterful in riding the waves of going through confusion. Even if you are on your head, like you're really turned around, you can still have a tool belt that you can reach down and say, what can I pull on right now to help me just hold on through this experience until until it passes and I come out and that seed is ready to germinate. And this is something you and I have in common. If you look at our charts in human design, that in human design, you can track, there are major themes you can look at in someone's life. And the major theme that you and I share is this theme of change. And this was something that I wrote about in the Incarnation Cross book that I came out with this past year, which is that if you look at your Incarnation Cross, which is this major theme of your life, you're able to see that the dark periods of your life have a flavor that relates to the overall major theme. So for example, you and I have this theme of change. And in the highest frequency, that's feeling really oriented to the direction you need to change towards. But in the low frequency, it's feeling very disoriented and having no idea what you're supposed to be doing or where you are, or even who you are. And I came to realize that that low frequency flavor it provides the dynamic of understanding the whole picture. You know, you can't become an expert in something unless you see both one polarity and the other, the high polarity and the low polarity. So if you want to become an expert in changing direction, you have to go through a lot of experiences where you're very oriented and you're very disoriented. And having this tool belt that I've cultivated of what can I pull on if I'm really confused. And part of that tool belt is just the perspective of it's okay. It's okay that I'm confused right now. Thank goodness I'm confused. That means that the next state of being not confused, the next state of being really oriented to where I'm supposed to go is coming, you know? It's like being in winter. You know the spring is coming. You don't have to try and prevent it from happening. And so these systems were the animal totems. That's a big one. The I-Ching. The I-Ching is something my mother taught me how to use when I was a teenager. And that's a very, very ancient, in fact, it's the second most ancient written text that has been in use for all of its life. So it's a 3,000-year-old text. So that's a really, really excellent one. And the Gene Keys and human design. So that those all started to roll together for me in the way that I was trying to orient myself. And this continues on. I'm still trying to find as many tools as I can to help through these kind of dark nights of the soul.
I just want to make an observation, because nature is, as you said, is an animals, that was sort of your first connection in a way that led you down this path. And, you know, even the later systems that you looked at, they're very nature related. And, you know, what you bring up is so important, because most of us live in cities all the time. I mean, some of us don't, but many of us do live in big cities. And oftentimes we do not either don't care to or don't make time to connect in nature or to be in nature, which of course we could go through all the amazing things that happens when we are in nature, from a physical health standpoint to forest bathing, to how the ions work on our body, and how just being in that energy restores us in such a huge way. What you've discovered is that beyond the more obvious, that there is that language, and if we just kind of take the time to observe in ourselves and feel it, and it helps us get out of our heads, which is often what causes a lot of tension, pressure, confusion, depression, etc. And if we can start to feel ourselves again as part of nature, in nature, that in itself is incredibly restorative. But you know, what's interesting is you also said, well, okay, this is one way of understanding just the concept of being part of a system, as opposed to having just a linear, okay, A, if I go A and then I go B and then goes to C, right? And we start to reorient ourselves from a systems way of thinking, that in itself is actually very freeing. And it starts to open up our perception a lot and helps us actually navigate in a better way. So I know you talked about the incarnation crosses, but for people who don't know about human design, and because that, by the way, is all related to human design, how would you describe it to someone what human design is as a system? And also I-Ching and the Gene Keys, which is another system that you use.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of systems to just initially break into. Well, the reason that the Gene Keys and human design and the I Ching are all related is because they all, in some way, relate back to the I Ching. And the I Ching is this system of 64 hexagrams that provide, well, originally the I Ching was used to help people just navigate a very ancient world of where should I place my next step? What's the most aligned thing for myself to do moving through this very ancient world? And that's evolved. And then human design picked up on the I Ching and converted these divinatory proverbs that said, I think you should go this way. Here's the healthiest step forward. Here's a piece of advice, and converted it into something that is more related to the human energetics. So human design, the way I explain it, the way I understand it, because everyone's going to give their own explanation of how human design works, is that it's a system that you get a map of your energetic system that you plug in from your birth time and your birthplace. And this map reveals these workings of your energetic system. And the only thing to do with human design that you need to, that's really the real purpose of it, is that you just observe where your intuition comes from in your body and where your gut instinct comes from. And then also maybe notice where you're picking up on the instincts of others. And the whole goal of that is simply just to feel your own truth. And the more deeply that you can feel what's right for you, the more you can, cut away the influence of others and just hear the nature speaking within you. Because every human being has their own advice that's right for them. And the closer you can get to that advice being right for you, the more you can have a better dialogue with it. So the way I explain it when I do sessions is that first is human design is often misunderstood as something that you need to use as a tool. We're very kind of action oriented in society. We always think we have to do something with a tool. So when you learn human design, you think, I have to do something with this. I have to change myself. And the actual goal of it is just to hear yourself. Just like if you were learning about your liver and your small intestine and your stomach, you learn about these organs. You don't have to change anything about them. They've always been working. They've always been doing something to assist you. The most beneficial thing about learning about these organs is if one day you start having liver pain, you can say, oh, that's my liver. What is it telling me? And it might be saying, please stop drinking coffee, or please stop, eating this food that I don't like. And then you listen and you can follow the directives of the body. And it's the same thing with human design, except it's on the energetic system level. So if your energetic system is saying, ooh, actually, this doesn't feel good, if you've started to cultivate a language between you and the sensations of your body, when you get a message from your body saying this isn't right, you can really register it and then follow through and say, okay, I've heard this message. I'm not ignoring it. I'm listening to it. And I'm making an informed decision about what's right for me simply by just listening. And so what happened when I started studying human design is, okay, I memorized everything. It's a big system. It's kind of like learning astrology. You have to really spend a lot of time learning the jargon of it. And then I made a study deck about it. And then from the study deck, I started to study this kind of obscure part of human design, which is the Incarnation Cross, which is described as the life theme or the job description of your life.
The purpose?
Yeah, purpose. Except I find it's a little misleading because again, when you hear purpose, you think, well, that's something I have to do.
Right.
But your purpose is something that your body will bring you to if you continue to honor the directives of your body. That's the big trick of it. So it's nothing you have to do. It will actually just kind of accidentally come through you if you keep listening to the impulses that are yours. And therefore, it's the job description term can be a little misleading, but that's also why it's so important to just start the observation process of what do I feel? Where am I getting my clearest intuition in my body? How can I sense that? How can I feel that? And if I honor that more and more and more, my body will innately put me into the places where I am needed, where the consciousness that I carry as a representation of a certain type of consciousness that might be needed somewhere in the world, and your body will bring you there if you simply listen. And in that way, it's kind of wu wei. It's like doing, not doing. The impulses of your body will bring you to the place you need to be without any effort involved if you can just learn them. And so human design gives you the opportunity to kind of hear what those, to just register, because
Get to know yourself, really.
yeah, it's very easy to ignore the sensations of the body. And I think we're actually kind of trained to do that. And during the quarantine, everybody learned this the hard way, because as soon as we weren't able to be distracted anymore, the intuition of, oh, I don't like the job I work. I don't like the city I live in. I don't like the apartment I live in. I don't like my partner. I don't like my trajectory. It became very loud. And so the less we were distracting ourselves, the more our body, our nature, the nature that we live within all the time, was sending us subtle messages. And the silence that the pandemic gave us allowed these impulses to become louder and louder and louder. And it's very healthy. It's very healthy to
one of the biggest gifts of the pandemic. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think so. But it's the Incarnation Cross really helped me to understand that if you want to find yourself in the place where you're most needed on this planet, then the biggest way to do that is to honor your type, which is your strategy in human design, which is essentially saying, honor your operating system. And if you know what that is and you can feel it, it's going to bring you to the right place. And even if it brings you to a place where things are dark, that might still be an important lesson for you to get to the place where you know what you're supposed to be doing, where you have your direction. And I found that very comforting. And I think it's comforting for a lot of people to hear that the experiences that they have that are so challenging, or when they feel really stuck, or they feel like they really don't know what to do with themselves, that actually might just be the perfect polarity of learning that's going to take them to their highest state.
Absolutely. And there's another really important point about human design that you brought up earlier, is that everybody is different and unique. We all have our unique operating system. So it starts to take away the pressure of, let's say, someone else imposing an idea, or you imposing somebody else's way of thinking or the way of right doing onto yourself, because that rarely works, if ever. And that actually, by coming into presence with ourselves, that's where we discover, oh, this is actually what's most appropriate for me. And it's beautiful also because it starts to really describe humanity as this beautiful collection of very different, unique individuals that are all in a pattern together, but each must be different. Each must be aligned with their own design. And there's something incredibly democratic and incredibly uplifting about that. And just to even take that idea in, it starts to, in a way, build self-esteem as well, because it's saying, hey, it doesn't matter who you are, where you are, what social strata you're in, we each have our unique purpose. And that's something that's very helpful. And also with regard to the darker times, I mean, it's just to quickly share for me personally, because we actually share the same Incarnation Cross, is that the confusion times or the darker sort of down times, it wasn't until I realized actually through human design that that's actually kind of the norm for me, that it became extremely freeing. So I wouldn't fight it. I wouldn't try to, you know, put some beautiful wrapping paper over it and call it something else, you know, but in a way it was a present because it was giving me that time, that sort of opportunity to hibernate, to kind of really go deeply and then come back out. And so that's incredibly valuable. And then one of the fourth system is the Gene Keys, which is Richard Rudd's creation. Mm-hmm. How would you describe that as it relates to human design and I-Ching? And by the way, I love what you've been doing, because in your work, you've been pulling together the connections between all these systems, which actually, to me, gives almost a GPS-like navigation system for life. And instead of like triangulation, which is what GPS does, this is like a quadrangulation, because it's four systems, right? But that gives like, oh my God, we're moving beyond 3D. We're like on another, you know, you get another dimensional kind of understanding. All of these are additional dimensions, of course, but it's fascinating because on the one hand, you start to see the through lines that go through all of them. And on the other hand, you go, wow, you know, there's all these tools, and there's more. I mean, these are just four, right? There's so many more that if we had an opportunity to get in touch with them is incredibly valuable. So yeah, I mean, you describe this very well in your book in Deck Animal Totems and the I-Ching, where you do the cross comparison between the I-Ching and indigenous animal totems, human design, and the Gene Keys.
Yeah. And it was actually once I got into the Gene Keys that all started to weave itself together in just a normal process. So the Gene Keys, to my understanding, is a continuation from human design, where the human design system uses the I-Ching as these kind of qualities within human energetics. But human design is like a schematics map. It's like a blueprint. And you look at it, and sometimes at first glance, it looks unintelligible, because it does look like a map of the plumbing of your energetics. But the Gene Keys, and this is why it resonates with so many people, is more like this beautiful poetic description of each one of those pipes in the plumbing. And what does this pipe look like when it's stuck in a low frequency? What does this pipe look like when it's operating really well? What does this pipe look like if it got into an enlightened state? And it's these archetypes of the human consciousness, these 64 archetypes of the human consciousness. And the I-Ching is so encompassing of perhaps the whole universe, this mathematics of the universe, that it doesn't surprise me that it wouldn't surprise me if it continued to be explored as something far beyond what we might originally think that it means. But as I started reading the Gene Keys, which is this big, thick book, and even its title can be a little daunting because it sounds like it's a book about genetics, but I find it one of my spiritual Bibles. And you start reading it, and it's so filled with this amazing content that you can only read a few pages at a time, because it's like eating cheesecake. You know, you can't eat too much at once. So as I'm starting to learn it, and you read your chapters that relates to your human design chart, I just kind of naturally was connecting the dots of the animals that I'm listening to, and the meanings of the totems, and the kind of messages that gives. That's like an advice. I consider that like my advice column that's coming straight out of nature, and I can't fabricate it, and I can't fake it, and I can't, you know, pretend it means something else. Actually, I can, but I'm trying not to do that. So that's like a library of advice. And then I was seeing, okay, so the I-Ching is also like a library of advice. It gives you 64 pieces of advice. And then the Gene Keys is related to the I-Ching, and that's kind of giving like 64 pieces of the human consciousness spectrum. And I started to see that there were parallels, and it started with the 28th hexagram, because um, this is the hexagram of fear, and I wasn't seeing clearly the purpose of fear as like an archetypal message. And so I associate fear with the rabbit totem. And of course, also totems are a language that is spoken differently in every culture across the world. So if you go from tribe to tribe, continent to continent, culture to culture, you're going to get a different language there. And it's also very dependent on how you interpret it. It might mean something different for you than it means for somebody else. So this is just my understanding and my interpretation of it and what I had learned. So I'm seeing this rabbit totem, and whenever I would see the rabbit totem, I would think, okay, some fear is going to come into my life. And I would immediately think, oh no, this is really bad. This is bad. Something bad is going to happen, and I don't want to be afraid. And there's nothing positive about being afraid. And then I was reading the 28th hexagram, which in the ancient I-Ching, the proverb says, you're in a house, and the house is filling up with water. It's flooding, and the beams of the roof are about to break. And you're so scared, you feel paralyzed, but keep moving forward. You mustn't be paralyzed in fear. So when you throw this hexagram, it's saying you're in a scary situation. You are feeling paralyzed with fear, but keep moving. Keep moving. That's exactly what you need to do in this moment. Don't stay in the house that's flooding. You need to push through this very frightening experience and get to the other side. And even still, then I would think, well, that sounds pretty scary, and I don't really understand like the more beneficial message of this. And then I read it in the Gene Keys, and Richard Rudd speaks about how the 28th hexagram is the hexagram of totality. And totality means to walk alongside death as a friend, to walk your life with encompassing the whole understanding that death exists and not fighting it, to not resist it, to live alongside it. And if you walk like that, then purpose opens up in your life and freedom opens up in your life. And that totality is this beautiful concept of befriending terror. And once I read that, it's like it all clicked into place of, oh, so when I see this rabbit totem, it's not telling to me, withdraw into fear. It's saying you have an opportunity coming into your life that will open the possibility of you befriending a fear that you have and walking with it and facing it and dealing with it and maybe finding the meaning that it's going to bring into your life. And then as this went on, I started to see more and more and more of these hexagrams, the advice that they give lining up with the advice that I was getting from this animal medicine. And slowly but steadily, the whole thing just kind of lined up. And the purpose of it, and okay, so then it became a whole book. I published this book about putting the animal totems next to the I Ching. And this is also, again, this is my interpretation. Someone else might interpret it differently. If you have a different understanding of the language of animal totems, you might place it completely differently. But the reason for putting them all together next to each other is that if you are in a moment of time where you really need advice, whether it's an animal totem, whether it's the I Ching, whether it's human design or the Gene Keys, if you need clarity, that the more avenues that you can have to tap into the wisdom of yourself, the better. And it might be that you throw a hexagram and you don't understand it. The old I Ching can be a little bit difficult to understand. It's proverbial. It's 3,000 years old. But if you read that next to a symbolic language, just like the I Ching, but a symbolic language that speaks to a different part of our psyche, it might land differently. There are some people that only understand things in images and symbols, and I think I'm one of these people that my mind likes to work in the symbolism that comes up from the subconscious. And you can even go so far as to say that animal totems is one of the oldest languages that we have, because it taps into this very ancient part of our psyche that assigned meanings to these different animals. So maybe you're able to look at a couple of different parallel archetypes and say, this one really lands with me. And also, you don't have to be a complete believer in systems of divination to get a benefit from this. You don't have to believe in human design or the gene keys or animal totems or whatever. But there's this theory, this hypothesis that was created by Peter Strzok, that our mind thinks that we can always get to a solution by only taking sequential steps towards it. The discursive mind that has to say, because of A, B, C, and D, we will get to E. And that's the only way that we can get there. But this team of researchers found that actually the best way for many people to get to a really great solution is to dive into the subconscious, to take a break from the discursive thinking patterns, and that the intuition that lives in our subconscious has a much better creative way to find a solution that far exceeds what we could possibly know. Our subconscious is picking up so much that we don't realize, that the subconscious has a much bigger pool of resources to find what's right for us. And if we take a break from the discursive mind and we throw in some kind of creative interval, whether it's taking a shower or playing the piano or doing divination, that it allows our subconscious mind to play and to bring a little piece of the subconscious up to the surface and say, look, here's something that you need to see, that you need to interpret. And I find it very, very useful to have as many of these methods to find the solution that you have. And so with the animal totems and the I-Ching, it's like a Rosetta Stone. You have 4 different systems that they seem to kind of line up, maybe not perfectly, but they allow a couple of different ways to see things, or even just learn about the different systems.
And I think you hit the nail on the head in the sense that it's the important thing is actually to take us out of that monkey mind that we often are, very busily involved in, and gives us that pause and opens up a space where we start to relate to something in a non-cognitive way, whether it's in a symbolic way or a subconscious way. And that's incredibly powerful. And it's another way of listening, which is another theme that you've been really tapping into throughout everything that we've talked about today, is how do we listen more attentively, and how do we listen with our bodies, with our hearts, with our whole system as a human being. And that is a fascinating topic, because that is absolutely not linear, and it's even beyond intuition. So I think that's incredibly powerful. Thank you for bringing that up. I think it's very helpful for people to recognize that there's so many ways and so many gifts that we have at our fingertips, that if we're just more aware of them, they can be extremely, extremely helpful.
Yeah. And one might be aligned to one person and not to another. It's a very personal journey to see, like, what is my avenue? What is my method to tapping in? You don't have to be clairvoyant.
No.
You don't have to have psychic abilities. Like, it's very convenient if you do have psychic abilities, but that's not required to be a pattern reader. In Ayurveda, the highest form of healer, and I forget the actual term, the highest form of healer translates to someone who reads patterns. It's the most esteemed name you can give to an Ayurvedic healer. And if you learn how to read patterns in the way that it aligns to your subconscious and your psyche, it's just as good as being psychic, because what is emerging out of this matrix that we're living in is being read, it's being received. And the more it's received, the more it shows up. The more it shows up, the more you feel that you're interconnected, even in the most difficult moments.
And then we are then in relationship to everything that's around, like truly in relationship, which is a give and take. And it's a lot of receiving, listening, as well as a lot of action. And we don't get overly tilted in a disequilibrium where we're just doing. So, all the languages that you're talking about is about actually reconnecting to ourselves and reconnecting to everything around us. One of the things I really wanted to bring up, because we've been sort of touching on this, and in some ways, you really said some amazing things about darkness and about times that are not so, where there's no clarity, or where there's frustration, sadness, or this very sort of introverted space. And I know you're working and doing study on yin mysticism, which you said is often very misunderstood, and I certainly would agree with that. And this, to me, absolutely relates to sort of even the yin mystery of the feminine as well, although that's a different aspect. And I feel that, especially today, in this time and age where the position of women has been rising, the understanding of intuition, we've kind of regained that back from where we lost it in the ancient world. We are missing, though, this understanding, of, I feel, the dynamic of it and how we can work with it in a helpful and constructive way. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on yin mysticism and what I just said.
Yeah, yin is such an interesting topic. And I've been kind of banging my head against the wall trying to put it into words, because the concept of yin really by itself is not compatible with words. The part of our brain that speaks is actually one of the only parts of our brain that's completely lateralized to the left brain, the part that says, okay, I can put a thought into sequential words consecutively to make a sentence and make it into to spoken word. So the concept of yin by itself is difficult to explain because it's so paradoxical, it's so obscured, it's so impossible to truly know, and yet it is so important that every person takes the space to cultivate a relationship, and very intimate relationship with it, because it's half of the whole equation. And any kind of equation that leaves it out is not whole, it's not balanced. And unfortunately, the yang, what we're used to, which is much easier to understand, it's linear, it's light, we can see it, these two principles that make up all things, the seen and the clear and the linear, and the unseen, the obscured and the abstract and the paradoxical, they are totally equal. But yang has a tendency to forget that yin exists. It has a tendency to feel, I'm whole when I'm uncoupled from the two. And yin has a tendency of saying, no, let's partner together. So our society, there's no question, it's been very yangified, and you see it in every single part of society. We see it in the way we think, and the way we speak, and the way we value leaders, and the way we value beauty. It's all kind of based on this very yang thing. And it's important to understand that yin and yang is not masculine and feminine, not at all. In fact, men and women are in all important ways equal. They're equal in yin and yang. So men have just about as much yin in them as women do. The difference would be just incredibly slight. So to say, there's a lot of thoughts around what it means for yin to be remembered. And there's this sentiment of, well, that means it's for women to be remembered. And yes, of course, when there's one half of a population that feels, that it's been obscured, bringing it back into equal partnership brings complete balance back. But the part of yin that's forgotten, this complete way of being, that things can be still and silent and empty and void, and that it actually brings a huge amount of success and victory to have that part of the equation in everything that we're doing, that men suffer just as much to have yin be forgotten from their systems. And I would even argue it might be worse, because
Yes.
for women, it's maybe a little more externalized, the
Mhm.
suppression of yin. For men, it's internalized. The suppression of yin is very internalized. It's been hidden. So there's like a hidden damage for yin in men as well. So, for example, if we're talking about the yin ways of being,
Before
like
you
power.
before you go there, I just want to say it's so interesting because in TCM, in traditional Chinese medicine, that's actually what practitioners are always aware of when they're treating men and treating women. That, for example, just very just basic example, is that they have to look very differently because women tend to externalize anything that's wrong with them. Like, you'll see the symptoms, you'll see the signs much more easily. Whereas men, it's actually really kept under wraps. So they seem, from a health perspective, they're fine, but they're not. And there's a different way to approach. So even in healing modalities, that's very much expressed in parallel. So sorry, you were talking about.
And exactly. And it, in a way, when you think about, we see women suffer because they were left out of partnerism, of the kind of partnership model that existed for most of human history. Most
Mhm.
was a partnership model of equality and an egalitarian society. And then only very recently did that go away.
Mhm.
But so we see women, they're suffering to see this lack of of partnership, but in men, just as much suffering, but it's hidden. It's missing. We don't see it. So part of the work of universally, collectively recalling yin, or I'm using the word yin, but there's many different words for it, this kind of emptiness and void and stillness principle, is that we can remember that part of healing that is healing it in men as well
Mhm.
as healing it in women, and to see where has been shut down or stigmatized, or we've kind of twisted what it means. And it's very sad to see that yin qualities have been associated with like evil and bad and pain, and when in reality our yin principle, when we have it imprinted healthily onto ourselves, we can feel comfortable with moments of existential dread. We can feel comfortable with moments of I'm empty. We can feel
Mhm.
comfortable with it's dark, the same way that we can feel comfortable with it's night, I can rest. It's
Mhm.
winter, I can repair. Or whatever these still moments are, there's a benefit to it. And it's it's hard to speak about every kind of situation that this can manifest in, because it's in everything.
Right.
But for example, if we look at The Art of War, which is this ancient book that's really heralded as one of the most incredible resources to finding success. If you're fighting a battle, if you're fighting a war, how do you find success? And if you follow these guidelines that Sun Tzu wrote as this
Mhm.
military general, he says you will win any battle. And the whole advice of The Art of War is that if you know when to have a yin response to something, or to have a yang response, and you give it the appropriate yin or yang reaction, you will find your way to victory. But if you
Mhm.
only know how to fight in a yang way, or if you only know how to fight in a yin way, and yin in the art of war, yin fighting would be kind of covert or hidden, or waiting and patience, and the yang way would be just directly fighting and directly attacking. That you won't win, you won't find success. And this also applies in much smaller non-war settings. But if we only know how to approach solutions by doing the yang thing, I can only get a career and I can only get a pay raise if I'm constantly in action and I'm attacking my fate and trying to make things happen. That's not the only way to do it. Or if you're having an argument with someone and you only know how to just confront in a very forward way, it's you're missing half of the equation to success. And we're not really educated in how can I utilize yin approaches, even in a setting of confrontation. So if somebody's coming at you and really attacking you directly, you can win that argument by not attacking back at all. You know, the more you're getting, the more there's a yang situation, the more you can respond in a fluid and yin way. And I think this is an important lesson for anybody to learn if they're dealing with someone who they can't beat, if they're dealing with someone that they can't win a fight with because they're too strong and they're too young. You can still win that battle if you just utilize that you can, become obscured and find a route that's abstract, nonlinear to your goal. And the advice I give is, if you come across a situation where you don't know how to win, put your eyes on the goal that you want to get to, the highest goal, the best goal, and then find any kind of abstract pattern to get there. It's almost like, to utilize yin methods is like to sink under the water. Like your head can pop out anywhere. And once you're under that water, that subconscious, the methods to getting where you want to go I can't even describe them. They're not linear, but you can find a way.
Yes.
So that's just one example of how yin practices or yin ways of approaching things are really can be very, very beneficial in a way that we're just we don't really learn about it. Even in human design, if you talk about projectors, like, they're very yin beings. They can find success by attracting in, and that's actually their method. But we're so taught as a society that the only way to find success is by action and doing, that people who are geared to be yin in their design, in their intuition, to pull in their opportunities, exhaust themselves and hemorrhage their energy trying to act in a yang way. And yeah, it's a very, very, very vast and fascinating concept that it's in everything. It's even in our anatomy, even in our hemispheres, even in our reproductive organs. We can observe how yin and yang are interplaying together. And if you remove half of that equation, there's like health is gone, balance is gone.
Thank you for that very deep dive and just powerful discussion. And do I sense that you're going to be writing your next book about yin mysticism or yin?
Yes. Well, I'm working on it now, but it's challenging because the whole thing about yin is you don't understand it. How do you write a book about something that you don't understand? And that, in my theory, is no one is an expert on yin, because yin is like a black hole. You can't see it, pure yin. And practitioners, like traditional Chinese medicine practitioners, they understand yin always in a duality. They really understand how yin works in balance. But to separate it from yang, while most practitioners would say it's more healthy to always have them in unity, the thing is, one half of the unity is systematically forgotten and demonized. That there's this imprinting of an archetype is just so left behind, that I think it's very important to separate it from the whole, and to notice how can I relate to this? How can I triangulate an understanding of something completely unknowable? And that is hard to write. It's a little bit difficult to put into words.
That is a mystical task. I mean, in so many ways. And yet we absolutely have the possibility of how do I say this, experiencing it and channeling it in a way. I mean, the challenge, of course, you're right, to write again is left brain. It's the opposite of yin in some ways. And yet, therein lies the fun. I mean, therein lies the mystery that draws us into want to discover it. So I feel that you know, through all the pieces of work that you've manifested in the world, it makes sense to go here. And I just want to say that I love how you've been describing each of your methods in a very, helpfully objective way, so that it's laid out in a fashion where people can understand it without having to have particular belief systems. So, in other words, you've laid it out in a very layperson way, which I really appreciate, because oftentimes when we discuss spirituality, it tends to get a little ungrounded at times. And you've really put it in such a grounded way that people can access and feel that they can understand. And I just want to add that, I think so many of these modalities are incredibly practical. And they're not a parlor trick. They're not, I mean, I don't have to say this to you, but I'm saying this as a general commentary, where I think there's a lot to be gained when people start to understand these modalities in that way, instead of something that's out there or something that's so sort of ethereal, when it's not. It's only ethereal because we have not grasped as human beings, our own being and the fullness of our being, which is way beyond just what is tangible. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for those.
I really appreciate you saying that too, because sometimes I feel a bit like a dilettante, because I'm not perhaps a master in any one of these fields, but the whole goal is, as I study it, as I'm, attempting to reach to get some semblance of an understanding of this, I can bring others along with me. Mm-hmm. And I can do that using art. I'm very, very blessed that I was born to artist parents who, gave me the genetics to be able to use art as a descriptive method to bring along the subconscious on the ride of learning. But I sometimes feel, I'm in between, I'm trying to translate what I'm learning and bring others on that journey, because if I want to learn it, I can only assume others want to too, and yes, others might be struggling as much as I am to read through these like dense texts that have no images, or it's not hands-on.
You're an navigator, and you're helping people navigate. That's exactly it. So I think that therein is the gem, is that you're helping people gain access to sometimes very esoteric concepts and actually grounding it to make it practical in their lives. Yeah. So thank you for doing that for all of us. And it's beautiful. And with your amazing talents, I love your books. I cannot stop staring at your illustrations. They're just absolutely gorgeous. And they bring another level of energy in that I can feel. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
How do people reach you, Brynja, who want to learn more about you? What's the best way? Well,
I have a website that I sell the products that I have so far. And the website is www.ceremoniance.com. Let's see if I can spell that out loud. CERE. Yeah, put it in there. Spelling is not my strong suit. It's not that not on that side of the brain. And my email's on there as well. And I have,
right?
Sorry?
You're on Instagram as well.
On Instagram, also Ceremoniance. Yeah, there's lots of different avenues for contact, but I'm available and I'm learning, and I'm also very open for collaboration. I think that as we're just talking about yin and that coupling and putting things together and putting people in partnership, and art, bringing art into professionalism, I think is one of the side effects that will occur from bringing yin into the world. So I feel very much like I want to help others bring art into the important things, to kind of nourish others' work with art, mm-hmm, to get it out into the world, because art has much more power of manifestation than we could possibly imagine. That was a really big lesson I learned beginning this journey. So yeah, there's art, there's books, there's cards, there's emails, there's sessions. So I'm here.
Amazing. Thank you so much again for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Stephanie.